Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you again this morning.
Good to be here. Looking forward to today.
Yes, and this is more or less the last podcast for Mental Health Awareness Month. We are doing another presentation at the church that we presented at last week, and we'll post that next week for on Sunday. But overall, otherwise, this is the last podcast for Mental Health Awareness Month, and we'll kind of get at some new stuff next month. But today we're going to talk about exercise.
Right. We always talk about these four things. We talk 3 or 4, sometimes it's 3. Nutrition, good nutrition,
Yep.
Restful sleep, effective sleeping, and exercise, as well as stress management. How do you manage your stress? So we talk about the 3, the Trinity, plus 1. So it's 3 plus 1. On previous podcasts, we've talked about nutrition. We've talked about sleep, the sleep cycles, and how important it is. We haven't spent as much time talking about exercise. So we thought before we leave Mental Health Awareness Month, it might be a good idea to talk about the benefits of exercise. And we found a couple of articles that really have a really good perspective on this topic. And one of these articles was written by Mark Gold. As it turns out, Mark Gold is a Floridian. He's at the University of Florida, started one of the Brain Institute there. And the title of his article is How We Can Exercise Away Addiction and Depression. We're, of course, concerned about both. Primarily, we want to talk about, we're going to talk about both addiction and depression, but we're going to focus on depression because, as you will hear in this podcast, it turns out that exercise is a very effective and evidence-based approach to treating all kinds of mental disorders, but especially depression.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those words that you just said are very, very important. And so I'm just going to repeat them. And that, we always talk about evidence-based. And so
Right.
people, when we think about evidence-based, we're talking about strategies or interventions that have been researched and have been shown through research, oftentimes through randomized controlled studies of some sort, or at least some type of controlled studies where there's a comparison group and shown benefits, different treatments or interventions that have shown benefits to people dealing with some type of concern or issue, in this case, depression.
Right.
And exercise has been shown to result in significant improvement. And so we're gonna chat about that a little bit.
That's right. And, we use, to treat depression, we use medications, we use drugs that either increase certain brain chemicals or decrease certain brain chemicals. So we use stimulants, which increase the availability of dopamine.
Right.
We use antipsychotic medications to reduce dopamine, to absorb dopamine. So we want to take away the dopamine. We use antidepressants, both serotonin reuptake inhibitors and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, to make more serotonin available. So we know that our drug treatments are designed to either increase or decrease the chemicals that are already in our brain.
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah. And another one, we talk about serotonin and dopamine and glutamate. There's all kinds of neurotransmitters that we often talk about, but there is another one that I don't think people talk about quite as much.
Right.
And it's BDNF, a brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it has been around a while, but research is really starting to grow in this area. And so, there's a lot still to be learned about brain-derived neurotropic factor, but it's a very fascinating substance.
Right. It's just a protein, but
Yeah.
it's sometimes called the fertilizer of the neurons. Okay.
Right.
It has sort of this global beneficial effect on every part of our nervous system. helping the nervous system to grow, helping it to mature, to maintain its health. It's an exceedingly important factor in our brain.
Mhm.
And yet we know virtually nothing about whoever talks about BDNF. We talk about dopamine, we talk about serotonin, we talk about these other brain substances. Very rarely do we talk about BDNF, but it's absolutely essential to brain health. It just we don't talk about it. And we also, what we know about, there's two important things to know about this factor. One is that if you have low levels of this, you have difficulty learning new things, and there are also effects on your emotional state. The mood swings and depressive symptoms increase if you have low levels of BDNF.
Right.
So we want to increase levels of BDNF. Well, the most effective way to do that is with exercise.
Right.
There are no drug you can take to increase BDNF, as far as I know. But we know that it doesn't even have to be vigorous exercise. Exercise is the most effective way to increase BDNF. And it's not insignificant. I mean, the change is in the hundreds of percentage points.
Yeah.
That you can increase BDNF by 200 or 300% just by exercising. And yet, how often do you hear a conversation about, well, I really need to exercise because I have to increase my BDNF? You know, it's not
Right.
something to talk about, but here it is, this exceedingly important fertilizer of the neurons that most of us know we don't know anything about it.
Right. Yeah. It's a very complicated system, and
It really is.
I know that you know, people will talk about neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, norepinephrine, those guys, and sometimes we talk about them so often that we feel like we know them, and
Right.
but it is a very complicated system, and BDNF is also another very complicated system, and what happens is when we exercise, it releases a protein. And like all proteins, it has a very interesting name. It's fibronectin type 3, domain containing protein 5.
And then
And
you wonder why we don't talk about it, right?
right, and it's like who
Dopamine is so much easier to say.
right. It's like, why not just say dopamine? It's fine.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but so we have this system, we have this chemical. We know BDNF is important. We know that when you have low levels of it, you have increased risk for depression and anxiety and mood swings and things like that you mentioned. And so again, it all kind of comes back to, well, if exercise, especially endurance exercise, increases BDNF, maybe that's one of the reasons why we're seeing that exercise is such a great way to treat and in many ways prevent depressive episodes.
Right. And we said at the beginning that we're going to talk a little bit about addiction and depression.
Mhm.
And as it turns out, the addiction system, the reward system of the brain, is the same system that's also implicated in depression and anxiety and several of the mental illnesses. So the brain is the brain. It does certain things, and much of the human brain is dedicated to pleasure-seeking activities. And we want to feel good,
Right.
the feel-good activities. And everybody knows dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter. But there's also this relationship between addiction and depression. And if we can digress just for a second, I do this New York Times thing called Connections. It's fun to do. It's a little word game. And last week I had a heck of a time with one of the answers because I couldn't figure out how shady fit into anything. And my son looked at it and said, "Oh, that's Eminem." And I said,
Oh,
"What do
Slim
you mean that's
Shady.
Eminem?"
Slim
Well,
Shady.
how was I to know that Slim Shady had any? I mean, I know who Eminem. Don't do that, Bernie. Don't give me that look. I know what that look means. I know that Eminem is a famous rapper, and I've listened to some of his songs, but I didn't know that Eminem and Slim Shady it's the same person, right? Slim Shady is the name. Okay. So it's a world that I know about, but it's not a world I live in. Anyway, Eminem is an addict, and I say is an addict. He's in recovery. He's overcome his addictions, but he overcame his addictions through exercise and also Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did not know this either, but I guess he's been sober for 16 years or something like that. He said at one point that he was taking 70 to 80 Valiums a day. Is that even possible?
I don't know.
I mean, I read that, but I thought, is this fake news? I don't know how I don't know how you would survive.
Yeah.
Anyway, he overcame it and he posts his 16-year pin somewhere on his website. So he's not ashamed. He's very proud of his accomplishments through AA and exercise. And eventually he developed his own exercise system that involves free weights, chin-ups, using a pull-up bar and bench presses. So he did, over time, discovered a workout regimen that worked for him, and he overcame his addiction.
Mhm.
Reason he was able to overcome his addiction is because the exercise that he did to treat addiction would be the same thing that you would do to treat depression.
Right.
And that's the connection, that it's the same brain system is involved in both addiction and depression. So we want to talk mainly about the mental health benefits of exercise, as it enhances, as exercise will do what the drugs we take will do.
Absolutely. And, and it all releases neurotransmitters, and it all releases hormones and chemicals in our brain. And we were talking about the brain-derived neurotropic factor, and, of course, dopamine. Dopamine is that feel-good neurotransmitter that, people always, very often, I won't say always, very often people will attribute dopamine to addiction, because they'll say, well, if a substance, if you're doing something or you take something and it releases dopamine, well, that's why you get addicted to it. But, the reality is that anything you enjoy releases dopamine. It's, if you enjoy a piece of cake, if you enjoy a jog, if you enjoy a show on TV, that all of that releases dopamine. You enjoy it because it releases dopamine. If you didn't release dopamine, you wouldn't enjoy it. So
Right.
it's not necessarily a direct one-to-one that, okay, if it releases dopamine, that means you're addicted to it. That's not what that means. That's very overly simplified. But there's been a lot of research that talks about the positive effects of exercise on addiction. And again, we're making that connection with dopamine there because we often associate dopamine with addiction. But the positive benefits of exercise on addiction and depression, because it does have this sort of blanketed influence on our brain that affects all of the neurotransmitters, or at least most of the neurotransmitters, and our overall brain health. And that's a really important, I think, point to make, is that exercise is not like an SSRI that focuses specifically on serotonin. Exercise affects all of the neurotransmitters.
Right.
Serotonin.
Right. And we typically talk about dopamine, and you're right. It's whatever releases the dopamine. Dopamine's the feel-good drug. Whatever produces dopamine in your brain is what you're going to do. It might be cocaine, it might be alcohol, but it might be exercise, because exercise also releases dopamine. And much of this connection between exercise and mental health, exercise and neurotransmitters, was done at, of all places, the University of Buffalo, by Peter Thanos. He's the director of behavioral neuropharmacology and neuroimaging at their medical school. And he did much of the original research on the positive effects of exercise on addiction and on mental health. And he's quoted in this article, we posted the article in the show notes, that aerobic exercise, running, walking, swimming, anything that gets you breathing a little harder and increases your heart rate, has a profound, he was the one who discovered that exercise has a profound effect on dopamine and on the dopamine receptor. So suddenly we can take medication, we can take drugs, both illegal and legal, prescribed, to increase dopamine, or we can exercise and release dopamine. So you're going to get this effect either way. And he was the one who did the original research in this area. And he said that aerobic exercise decreases drug-seeking behaviors because it provides the dopamine that your drug use was meant to to do, was meant to provide. And it has the same effect not only on cocaine users, but on any addictive behavior. And that makes sense, whether it's cigarettes, alcohol, opioids. It doesn't matter what the drug is. All those drugs simply release dopamine. So
Right.
anything you can replace it with will also release dopamine.
Which brings to the point that, so really we see exercise as not an intervention so much as
No,
it is just it's a
Mm-hmm.
necessary thing for us to do on a regular basis, because my goodness, like, what else could you do that has all of those benefits?
Right.
And we're not necessarily, again, even talking about everybody becoming, marathoners or triathletes or anything like that. We're just talking about some exercise, periodically throughout the week that
Mhm.
will help release some of these, beneficial neurotransmitters and neurochemicals.
Right.
And it's not an intervention. This is just the way that we should be living.
But we don't see it. How many of us see exercise as an intervention?
Right.
I mean, we see it, oh, I got to go to the gym. Oh, I hate to run. Oh, I don't want. We see it as this imposition on us,
Yeah.
but we don't see drugs that way. We don't say, oh, well, I have to take well, some of us do.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to take my medication. We take our medication willingly, gladly, because it has a positive effect. But we don't view exercise as an intervention, and yet it is.
Right.
Exercise should be one of the interventions. But if you watch commercial television, and particularly, you see plenty of drug ads.
Yeah. No extra
Okay,
ads.
I mean, there are little jingles, musical notes that you can even remember. You get these earworms, they call them, where you remember these jingles for certain kinds of drugs. Okay, and you're told if you take this and if you take that. So the pharmaceutical industry is very effective in marketing those drugs. There's nobody marketing exercise. I mean,
Right.
you've never seen an ad for, if you really want to get better, if you really want to feel better, start walking 3 miles a day.
Right.
So we don't think of exercise as an intervention, but it really is. I mean,
Right.
and we need to start thinking about it as one of the interventions we use to help ourselves feel better.
Right. Yeah. It should just become a way of life. And
Mhm.
because it can improve so many things, it can help, as you were saying, with substance and abuse and addiction, it can help reduce cravings. It makes it to where we aren't engaging in some of those drug seeking behaviors.
Right.
It's also, and again, this is so important. Sometimes people who have addiction related issues, whether it's cigarettes or anything else, they talk about needing something to do.
Right.
I
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
do with my hands, or I need some place to be, or some exercise is that replacement behavior. You
Right.
can't. I would find it very difficult to be jogging while drinking alcohol or jogging while using some other illicit substance. It's hard to do both things at the same time. So exercise is a great replacement behavior for some of these things that cause problems.
Yeah. When we talk about people who are addicted, it's the way they live their lives. They
Right.
go to a bar, they go to a party, or they have friends who are using. And okay, so you can stop using the drug, but you want to develop replacement behaviors. What are you going to use in place of the drug? And so what we're asking you to do is you trade in your drug using friends, the guys you've been smoking weed or doing cocaine or whatever, trade them in for a new group, an exercise group. But this is my pickleball group. This is my gym. These are my gym buddies. So you replace the negative influences with positive influences. So you reduce cravings because you're giving your brain the dopamine that it needs. You're also developing a replacement behavior, something healthy like exercise instead of unhealthy. It improves sleep because you're getting tired, and you want to do that. And it also improves your self-image because now you're exercising, you're feeling better, you're looking better, you have more energy. So your whole self-image begins to change as well. So these are the kinds of things the kinds of important changes that a regular exercise program will improve. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this former Olympian, he's now an Olympian psychiatrist, Barron, his last name. And he said, if exercise were a medication in a double-blind FDA qualified clinical trial, the trial would be stopped by the FDA because
Right.
exercise is so effective and with virtually no side effects that it would be unethical to not treat everyone with it.
You know, this happens all the time. We'll do like a drug study or we'll do an intervention study. And the results are so effective and they're so immediate that they stop the trial and they say, no, we have to get this out there so people can start using it.
Yeah,
And that's what he's saying about exercise. He said, if this was a double-blind study for FDA approval,
yeah,
they'd stop it because it's so effective. And there are no side effects. There are no adverse side effects to
right,
exercise.
right.
And so he said it would be stopped. But yet we don't use it.
Absolutely. It's just, has just been shown to be effective for every age group, for just about every form of psychopathology,
Right.
as both a primary and an adjunctive treatment. So it's difficult to make an argument against incorporating
Right.
exercise as treatment. And I think that, when we think about depression specifically, I mean, it's a worldwide problem.
Yeah.
About
Right. Right.
3.5 to 4% of people suffer from depression, many of whom, about a third or so, have treatment-resistant depression.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and that means that they've been on medications and oftentimes multiple medications for
Mhm.
managing their depression, and it doesn't help.
Right.
And even for them, exercise seems to be beneficial.
Yeah, well, there's talk today about other approaches for treatment-resistant depression, and we have things like transcranial magnetic stimulation. If you have treatment-resistant depression, if you're one of those individuals with treatment-resistant depression, you've taken medications, they don't work, or you have side effects, you can do transcranial magnetic stimulation. Ketamine is being used, psilocybin, magic mushrooms. There are other types of drugs that are now being used
Right.
to try to help these folks who have what we call treatment-resistant depression. Well, another way of managing treatment-resistant depression could be exercise. It's worth a try. I mean, TMS is worth a try, neurofeedback is worth a try, psilocybin's worth a try, ketamine's worth a try. So is exercise worth a try, and there are no side effects. There are
Right.
no adverse effects to medication, to exercise. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so, even if you are taking medications that are effective, you can add exercise to your treatment program and get additional benefits.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are trying to understand maybe what we mean by exercise, we're talking about aerobic exercise, whether that's jogging or walking or biking, sitting on a stationary bike or walking on a treadmill. Any of those things count as aerobic exercise, anything that just increases your heart
Right.
rate and breathing respiration rate. But also, there was a study done not too long ago that showed that weight resistant training, lifting weights has a significant and profound effect. And what was really interesting about that study is that it didn't really even matter how much weight you lifted or how often you did it, as long as you were doing it, whether you're doing it twice a week or 5 times a week, and whether you were doing really heavy weights or just, light repetitive weights. It didn't matter. It just showed that doing anything with, some weight resistance demonstrated a significant improvement in depressive symptoms. And what they also suggested was that it likely prevented depressive episodes.
Right. Right.
So it's like, not only is it a treatment, but it's a preventative measure for depressive episodes and symptoms.
Right. And as you say, the type of exercise you do is almost inconsequential.
Right.
You have to find what works for you. I find it very difficult to go to a gym. It takes time. I have to get to the gym. I have to come home and change, go to the gym, come home. Swimming. I was training for a triathlon one time, And I found swimming to be really difficult because by the time you got to the pool, you did your swimming, you clean, it was hours. It took 2 hours to do that. And I just didn't have that kind of time. I had young children and work, and I just didn't have enough time to devote to the swimming part of my training. The bicycling and the running didn't take that much time. You have to find what works for you. Eminem found over time that these were the things that really made him feel better. Whether it's exercise, meditation is the same way. You have to find what works for you. So do the exercising that you find least objectionable. You're not going to do something that you hate. You're not going to do something that imposes in your life. You have to do something that works for you. It doesn't matter whether it's weights, calisthenics, taekwondo, doesn't matter what you do.
Right.
You have to be active every day. Do what works for you. Do what you find acceptable, because you're not going to do something that you hate. I mean, how many New Year's resolutions do we have to make? You're only going to do it if you enjoy doing it. So it doesn't matter what you do. You have to get busy. You have to get moving.
Absolutely. So that's it for today, I think. And again, that's it for Mental Health Awareness Month. Sleep, exercise, good diet, and stress management. That's sort of the moral of our story for this month.
It's the moral of this story for sure. Right.
That's right. So get at it, get out there and exercise, go for a walk, and spend some time outside. And we'll be back next time to talk about some other things. So until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.